Hi everybody, very good morning. I'll just share my screen. Today we are into Angular material. Yesterday we learnt about class, because everywhere in Angular the class is the concept used when it is in components, when it is in any of the page, we use the class. So just to understand the class, yesterday we saw about how to do a class, what is get, what is setters, etc., and under what context class is generally used. That also we have seen. So Angular is all about earlier, as I said earlier, Angular is all about how you routing is mandatory. Generally, routing is mandatory, and it is better you use routing. Not mandatory means any proper web page design, if you are trying to do, everywhere routing is important. That's why we started a project with the routing. So that is how we started our project. I'm going to this FS dev. This is where we were in yesterday, and we found that when we tried to trigger this button, even though we have put the button, it was not appearing proper. That is where we were last start. We ended up the previous day's class. So right now we are moving ahead to what is this problem, understanding this problem. That is why first we introduce the class and getters, setters, all that I just introduced. So we have all these features available as part of Angular. In Angular TS file, if you notice, you can see that export class. The class is what is used. So this is why we taken the class yesterday. So second is, in Angular, the entire Angular structure is MVC concept, model view controller concept. So another is, everything is encapsulated through modules. Everything he has made it as a modules. So that means if I want to use a button is a module. If I go back to the documentation of Angular, if you see the button, if you go to the API of the button, API reference for Angular material button, and it is considered as an independent module by itself. It is considered as an independent module by itself. That means all the structure of the button, the material has its own structure. The structure of the button is defined inside this module. Module is nothing but it's a library. Basically, it is a library. It consists of directives, tags. That means we call it as mat button is a directive, right? Services, it can consist of many things inside that. Right now what we know is we use button as a library. Mat raised button, the word that we give it as an attribute, it is nothing but a directive, right? The directive is, you don't need a equal to value. Attribute means name value pair. In HTML, the concept of HTML, attribute means it's a name value pair. So here we don't call it as a name, sorry, we don't call it as an attribute. I'm talking about, going back to the code, I'm talking about this name that I'm giving here. This name is no longer an attribute, whereas color is an attribute because it's a name value pair. Whereas mat raise button, we call it as a directive. So this directive, to enable this directive, it is nothing but a component. Inside this component module, it is one of the component. So he made Angular material design is such a that anything that you see on the left hand side, everything is a you call it as a module. For this, you need to badge, if you want to use, you need to use this module. Bottom sheet you want to use, you need to use this module. So we will see most used one as a starting point. Whenever then there is a demand arise, we'll go to that module and try to use that module. First, before we start into the real Angular development, we see the basic modules. I have not imported this module on that day. Because I have not imported this module, your input, next is we are going to see input. So input is also, you can see that the API import mat input module. So this module is configured. under, I'm just going back to code. I'm going back to code. This is configured under app module. For this, every component you will see a module. Every component there is a module, right? So my app I created. My app is also has a module. Otherwise, we have to create a module. That's okay. So you can, every component, if you want to interact with that particular component, then you have a module. When it comes to road, there is called lazy loading concept. When it comes to lazy loading, that means I will not upload all the flights together in the beginning. We'll come to that concept little later. So right now we'll see that as soon as we install the Angular material, we know that my app component browser animation module got automatically installed, browser module got automatically installed, ng module got automatically installed, all got configured automatically. So when I see this button module, I've imported this button module, then only you will see the effect of the button module. Otherwise, you will not see. That is why in my last before class, since I was not imported this button module, you are not able to see that. If I want to properly align it, Shift Alt F, automatically it will realign. In Visual Studio Code, it is Shift Alt F, auto alignment. It will automatically realign. If there was no space, he will leave a space, etc. So button module is, you need to install. Once you import the module, under the section of imports, you need to add that button module here. Then only binding will happen. Then only this your code is using the button module, all the features of the button module. If you want to go into the details of this button module, if you, that is your curiosity, you want to learn, go to that project. Inside that project, FSDev is our project, node modules. Inside Angular, you can see a button module. Material, inside this button module is there. This is what the way the button module is supported is in this way, right? So button dot module, yeah, it has its own module, right? It will load only when it is required. Otherwise, he will not load it. So this is the page where you can see that declarative statement. D means declarative statement. So this is the module. You can see it has its own CSS. So you can use this. Theme has its own CSS. All this CSS, SCSS is what majorly used, right? So this is what is getting loaded. That is what you are seeing here. This is what this button module import is all about. All material, all modules are by default available, but you want to use it inside the Angular, then you need to import that at the parent screen. In our case, it is app module.ts. In case we are not following the lazy loading, this is the place where we have to import that. This is where this ng module is there. If it is lazy loading, you will have this ng module in almost all the module component. That is module component. I have created a component. Instead, I can create a module also, right? So that is where you have every module, you have a declaration, that is direct component. You have a imports. Imports is all about third-party modules. In our case, we are using button as a module. So once you implement this, yesterday's code that you have seen here, I just save it. It gets compiled. I've already started it with ngserve. It is already there. It is running. I created a node command prompt. I opened the node.js command prompt, went to the directory where my project is, and then typed ngserve. Once I type it, I get this compilation successfully done. Once this is done, if you see the web page, FSDev, you can see now my button, primary, all looks like this. There is no spacing, there is no outer spacing, etc., etc. That is where you need to adopt the CSS. So if you see the button, my button, there is no space. So generally there will be three types of button people will use. One is called small button. Small button is nothing but whatever. This current one is a small button. That means according to the word, there is an outer boundary. If I go back to the inspect element, just to understand better, now you can see this matte raised button. You see the CSS, right? Box shadow, matte flat button, or matte raised button. All these are multiple CSS. Background color is primary because I have given the color as primary. I can give different color as well in UI. So what are all attributes he supports, what are all the things that he supports, you get it from the documentation. It is all pre-prepared. In documentation, in API, you know what are all properties, what are all the properties available. Input, read only, whether the element is read only or not. So read only is an input I can give. If I say read only true as an input candidate, then it is considered as a read only component. Then type, input type of the element, type equal to string. The button type, they call it as button type. Generally in all the button type can be submit, button type can be normal button. So button type is there, that is the one. These are all part of the normal HTML itself. Type read only attributes. Then methods, focus he supports, focus options are there, update error state is there. These are all methods available. Method means events, that is we call it as mouse events. All those where we have not seen the details in our HTML, we will see it here. Then there is an input value accessor, how you want to access the value. Default, these are all, you don't have to change it, you go with the default things. When you are in advanced mode, you can touch all these things. So what it extends to, default it extends to what? Extends means basically what happens is I have a predefined class, I'm extending the same class to the another class. That means I already prepared a class, and that class I'm extending. That means all the properties of the previous class extends to this class also. That kind of an concept. As we go, we'll see all that. So other than this, blur supported, focus supported, get ID supported, get name supported, right? Get placeholder supported. So get type supported. These are all what you can use it in my code behind. That code behind is nothing but whatever the method you apply. I'll try to take an example on this. Whatever the method I'll apply, I will get that in my TS file. The TS file is nothing but code behind. I'm talking about this area. Whatever I apply there, I will get it here. I just made one sample click event. This is my method. On click my button, I will now, that is a function I have created. On click my button, console log inside my button function. That means when I click here, the code gets translated or moved from here to execute the function that is given here, and that function, whatever inside the function, that gets executed. In my case, this console log. Since it is a browser activity, you will see that console log underneath console. Underneath console, you will see that console log here. For example, I'll just click that button. These are all called methods. I click that button, my button. I have not done it for primary. I have done it for my button. Click that my button. I clicked it. You can see here inside my button. That means this code is getting executed on click of this function. On click of this function, this code is getting executed. This is very, very important. This is how the controls are transferring the data between one place to another place. This is where JavaScript comes into picture. From this point, JavaScript comes into picture. This point is purely a display element. Now, this button, I told there are three generally there can be three types of button. One is called small button. Small button, according to the space, the margins and everything is given, and outer layer is given, and it is associated within that. If you see the difference between this button without a material, this is material component, this is without a material component. You see the difference here in my UI. You see the my button, you see the outer boundary, all that. So whereas you see the primary button, there is a difference, right? That is one component. Another component, off of the width. So assume that your width is full width button, off width button. There are two concepts generally used. One is called full width button, another is called off width button. I'll just put it here, button. I'll put it under. You just see the difference. Div. If I just put it underneath a div, a button, right? Another button also I'll put it underneath the div. Just see the difference. Because you remember I said div is a block component. It is not an inline component. It is a block component. You remember that? So now underneath div is nothing but a wrapper. Div is nothing but a wrapper. Underneath div, I put a button now. Just see what the difference you get. Save all. Goes for compilation by default because ngserve automatically compiles the data. And I'm going back, you can see the difference. My button, primary, my button again below. So now I'll put this div, right? I'll just put a style first just to understand. Width 100%, right? 100%. I just put Control Fs. Just see what happens. Is there any change or there is no change? There is no change because you're given width as 100 full, right? How do I know whether the div is having a full width or not? Again, come to this, keep this, I'm just keeping this window down so that we can see side by side. I'm keeping the window down, closing that this bar so that I can view the screen fully. Be on the element, right click on this button, inspect. So you will come to this button. Just see the div. If I highlight the div, you see the div is really 100%, whereas the button is still not 100%. The button class doesn't support that 100% yet. So if I want to change it at the button level itself, I can change it from here itself to check how it looks like. Width 100%. You can see now the way it is showing. So if I put 50%, 50%, right? If I put under the button align is not align is not a style sheet element. Align is a thing. It is called what is called vertical align, horizontal text align. I'll just use text align, middle text align. I have center, I have a end, I have a initial. That means within the button where to align the text is the text align. Initial. You can see one by one how it moves. So it is like a debugging mode. You can check how it looks like, right? Start. Multiple things are used. Certain things are useful. This WebKit and all is for a browser support. Okay. When you are in Firefox, when you are in Internet Explorer, when you are in most of the things support by default. A WebKit is particular to if you want to support an iOS, you may have to use the WebKit. So by default, it is center. The text align is center. If I go back to the div, if I put here center, right? Text align. In this case, text align, I put it as center. See the difference. Same word text align I use because within div is acting as a wrapper. Inside wrapper, button is the one you are given. Whether you give it as a button or you give it as a direct text, for him it is equivalent to a text align only. So in this case, you are given a text align and they given div is still 100% because div is 100%. that below, if I don't give div 100%, see what happens. So default div is taking care of 100% style, whether you give it or you don't give it. If I highlight it, you can see there are certain element you will not see that 100% width, like span element. Any span element, inline element, div is a block element. That is why he is taking the full width. Whereas if you take anything that is span, that is it is on inline element. Display by default is inline. Then it will be actual width. Button is an inline element. That is why it was showing as a normal width. This understanding is very, very critical when it comes to understanding the HTML design. There are so many things you can avoid waste of CSS. There are so many things you can design properly. This is another one is 50 width is a medium. They call it as medium. 100% is the full width. One is small. Small is nothing but actual width of the button according to my space outer boundary. That is my actual width of the button. Medium is of the size. 50% of the width is used. Third is you call it as a third one is basically 100% width. That means the entire block. So entire block is used for the button. So these are all generally three attributes. Then that comes another important factor is when there is a two button within the same line, how do we align it? How do you align that button? Is it two buttons are going to be side by side from the left aligned, or is it going to be center with a gap between two buttons, or how you are going to align it? That depends on how you are designing your button. Generally, in such situation, you will not go for medium or full. You will always go for CSS of small button. Small button is the one where you can have multiple buttons within the same line, right? So this is, I'll just take an example on that. Assume that in one button, I want, now this is the div, this is the button, sorry, this is the div, this is button one. I'll change here accent color. I change here, I'll put this button inside this button itself, and I don't want to decide in any bit. If I don't give any bit, it is basically, I'll just make it as accent, right? If I don't put any width, then it is called by default div is full width. I don't have to put div because it is by default full width. So I don't have to specify that, unless otherwise I want to change the div to 50% or something. Otherwise I don't need to give because it's a block element. H1 is also a block element. It's all always considered as a full button. Primary, there is a button called accent. The color I changed it to, there are three primary colors I was telling you. I'll put one more button. For that, I'll give it as 1. So that we have tested all the three colors. 1. Right? There are three colors available by default. That is what the library we have added in the beginning. When it is a material, when you material component, when you add, it was asking you which default CSS you want to use. We have chosen some indigo something. Accordingly, this will come. If you see you can see now by button accent is there. That I'll just change it to 1. Now I want to design the space for this CSS. I want 1. If I put it align center here. Align center here. This is also one method. Style text align center is another method. Align is still supported. Most of the browser supports it. If I do it, you can see now. Align center, it is taken care of. Now I want to give a margin. Whatever, if I give it under div, I'll go back to my inspect element. I'm sorry, this element. I'll go back to this div. So there are three buttons now, button 1, button 2, button 3. Now there is a div here. So this div, whatever you give inside the div, that is applicable only for the entire div. That means if I put a margin or a padding, it is of no use. If I put a div margin, just I put a div margin. Just see what happens. Margin, I want only left and right margin. I don't want top margin. So 0 pixel, left and right margin 25 pixel. If I put that, just see when I mouse over on that button, div, you can see left hand side and right hand side, there is a space. That means your width can expand up to that margin, 25%. Generally, you can give 5% of your total width. Then uniformity is maintained throughout. 5%. 5% of the thing I want to maintain as my margin. Whether I change my mobile device, accordingly the margins will reduce. For example, if I go to the mobile device, accordingly my margin will get reduced. I'll go to responsive, say Moto G4, smallest screen. Just see the div, margin is reduced. Whereas if I put 25 pixel, whether it is a mobile device, whether it is a desktop, default that outer boundary will be 25 pixel only. So the ratio will not be proper, right? Whereas if you give it like this will be proper. So there is a 3 concept here. One is percentage pixel. There is also supported view. View is also supported. Then I don't know whether it is supports or not. I'll just check. Otherwise, it will give an error. Div view is also supported. View, but 10% of available viewport. Available viewport, 10% of that. So this is also another way of representation. It is equivalent to percentage, but it is more appropriate for most of the devices. This is more appropriate because you decide a viewport. Within viewport, you will trigger that. Any questions up to this, please let me know before I take up the further things. Now, my another job is how do I leave the space uniformly? That is what we are going to see next. So whenever there is a button within div, how I am going to leave the space, that is what we are going to take. First is normal style sheet. Any questions, please let me know before I move on. Any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll continue. Basically, the component, how you create a component, as soon as we initialize a project, I'll just come out of it. First, what I did was I created a fsdev and then I given a command ngnew. Ngnew created the entire project set within this fsdev. After that, I did one ngserve to make sure all the compilation is proper. After that, I have added ng add material, angular material. Ng add angular material. Sorry, add angular material, correct. Once I done that, then material got added. Then it has asked some questions. I've answered those questions. That is where default themes, everything has been set because material requires default theme. That is the idea of material, so that we don't have to redesign all the things. We can use the default parameters. Once I did that, then what we did was ng add material. After that, ng generate ngg component. This component I have created for my app component, but I am not using that still. This is a component I have created, but I am not using it. I am doing everything under my normal app because that initial learning, everything will do it under app. Once we get into routing, etc., then we'll go to the my app component. That is how I created a component. By default, your app component is available. You don't have to worry about. Now, inside that component, initially I made use of this. Now, I want to do a style sheet. Style, because there is no further questions, I'm proceeding. Margin, what do you want to do? See, how you want to set it. Every button, you want to have only right aligned so that the another button starts from the beginning, but it will leave a space to the right hand side, or you want to start with the left margin. If you start with the left margin, always the first button will be a left margin, the second button will be a starting with the left margin. That means there will be a slight offset when you are starting the button. It will not be always in the beginning of the space. So when you are, what is the right option here? Very difficult to say what is the right one. It is all purely consistency that you want to maintain. In my case, I generally use right margin. Margin right, colon, say 8 pixel multiplication of 8 pixel or multiplication of 16 pixel, or according to the device size, either you can choose 8 pixel or a 16 pixel. That is called media class. I will come to that little later. Right now, we are only worried about desktop. Margin right pixel, 16 pixel, I want to leave between every button. I am giving the style sheet as an independent candidate. In your exercise, I want you to try with, what do you call, inside. That means I want to give it at the div level, so that I'll give a 16 pixel. For all the buttons, I want to give a 16 pixel right margin. For all the buttons within a div. For all the buttons within the div, I want to give it as a 16 pixel. Then I want you to see how that was. I don't want to give it the style sheet at each and every line item level. So that is also possible. That is called percolating the within parent div. I want to percolate wherever there is a button class, where tag inside the div, wherever there is a button class, I want to apply the style sheet of 16 pixel. So I will give the class, it is all class attributes. It is not a style attribute, it is a class attribute. So how to create a CSS, you let me know. That is what I want to show you, take you as a exercise, and let me know tomorrow. That means Monday. I've done that. I'll go back to my, I've saved it. I hope I've saved it. Oh, I came out of, okay, ng serve. I came out of the component. Please note, we have not implemented PWA. We have not implemented Angular Universal. We have just with Angular material. There is called Angular Universal Concept. There is called Angular PWA, which we have not yet touched upon. Okay. Yeah, it has got compiled. As soon as it compiled, browser comes into picture. So you can see now my button right hand side space, accent, margin right hand side. There are two things I have explained it before. One is called padding, another is called margin. What is the difference between a padding and margin? I want you to explore. Keep that question always in you and try to explore it as you go. Right? And you can see the size of the button. It is not a uniform size, but it is aligned uniformly within the text. There is a requirement also possible. You want a uniform size button. You don't want button to be of different sizes. If you are having a uniform size button, then you have to be very careful of button content. What is the button name that you want to give? You have to be very careful with, right? So now this is what we have just given. Now I have clicked on my button. As I said, when you click on this function, this console log will appear. That will still continue because it's the same copy paste of the code. So I just reorganize. So still that functionality works. I want to focus. I want to create a focus. So how do I do? I'll just try focus equal to true. If I want to know what this focus is all about, you can go back, Angular material, button, focus. Focus is a method. Focus inputs and returns a promise that indicates whether the action is complete. So that is focus outside. That is whether the focus has got applied or not. We are now talking about attribute. Focus the input. That means attribute. When it is coming to attribute, I should not use arrow. I should not use arrow if it is an attribute. So focus true. I just try to give this attribute. See what happens. For initial component, try all the possibilities that is given so that your understanding is clear. So my button, I'm not able to see that it is focused. So I'm not able to see it as focused. So it will consider it as a variable. It is not supported. So focus is not with curly, I cannot give it like a curly braces. So focus is not supported in that way. That is an assigning an input. Assigning an input, I can do it in that way. So focus equal to true. So then if I say, for example, focus, I make it as a method now. I am focused. On focus is a method name. On button focus. This is my method name. This method, if I want get executed, I go to component.ts. Here I add that on button focus console log. I have focused. Just to check this, save it, save all, because I have changed it in component level, I changed it in HTML level. Just see, make sure you have this always enabled because you are using a console log. I am focused, click on it. I am focused is also selected because it was focused, that is why I was able to click on it. Inside my button function, that means click function is also working, focus button is also working. So when I click only, the focus is getting enabled. Otherwise, it is not getting enabled by default. So the focus is also working. Another is now tab. I'm using tab now. You can see I tabbed my button. I am focused. I have not done a click event, but you can see it is saying I am focused. It is able to check that. Accent is focused now. Tab. I am pressing tab. By default, Angular Material supports the movement of the icons according to the way it is configured in your HTML. So the focus will automatically change. So I want to know whether I'm focused or not. I can do in this way. Okay. So this is how you check the different events. These are all called events, right? That event is nothing but what you do over there on that action you perform on that particular button or any element. So this focus is not of any use. Input element focus is there. The way we need to apply the input element has to be slightly different as per the documentation. We need to understand that. Focus, I just give focus. I don't want to give any true or anything. I just want to say, what is this I? What is this I? Okay, I'll just say focus. I don't want to give anything input or output. Make sure the compilation is proper. If compilation is proper, you will not get any error. Then only HTML will get rendered. Otherwise, HTML will not get rendered. I have given a focus, but it is still not enabling because it's not coming here. There is some, because it has to be driven. Some action has to be performed to get that focus, enable that, because there is a possibility you give a focus for multiple elements. So that is not the way it has to be done. Right. So we'll talk about that as we go. But how the method is applied, you have understood that. Then it is called blur. Another method is blur. Blur is when it moves out of that button. Blur is when you are moving out. I am moving out. I'm not doing a click event, but I'm moving out or on blur. I just use on blur. On blur, I want to use this method. First few components, you make sure you create each and every function, understand each function that it works, because most of the components it is supported. So I am moving out of focus. Moving out of focus. Please remember, focus, I am entering into focus. Right? I do this. What I will do is, I will do this for this also. This also. I'm on blur. I'll just say here, I can give a parameter. So I can give a parameter here, say accent. These are all accents. So I give here this value, I copy paste inside it as a parameter. On focus, I just give it like this. On focus, this is primary. Right? Primary, on focus primary, because this is my parameter. I want to use this parameter because you want to know where I am. So I want to know that. So I made it as a parameter. I click here, element name as my, so element name, I type this as a string. I can change all this. So element, I am focused on, there are two ways I can write it. One is with ampersand console log. I can give it with the element name as a comma separated, out of focus from, comma, element name. Same element name, I want to give it as my string. Declaration is required. It's a mandatory that you need to declare it in the recent version of the all Angular, etc. You need to declare it. There is a setting available to change that. That I will do it later. I have not copied this click on my button. So I have not copied that. So I saved all. Now I come back here. So I click on my button, right? I focused on primary. You can see I am focused on primary. So now I am focused on accent, right? I move out of focus from primary. I'm moving out of focus from primary. I focused on accent. Again tab. I am moving out of focus from accent. So you can see that that attribute value is used, and I shift back. I am focused on accent because I am shift tab. Shift tab, coming back to the previous action. Tab, moving forward, moving backward. So I'm focused on primary. I blur on, I'm moving out of focus from primary. I'm focused on accent. One, I'm moving out of focus from accent, but I have not given any focus method for one. Is this clear? Please confirm. So like this, we'll see a few more components in a subsequent classes, but try to change these attributes, uniform width. How do I apply a uniform width button? Because right now it is not a uniform width. How do I apply a uniform width? How do I, there are two already given exercises are there. One, I want you to, I've given us directly a style sheet. I don't want the style sheet. For every button should follow this principle. If it is underneath div, I want to follow one hierarchy, right? How that needs to be established. I want you to apply your thinking and bring up with your own idea. There are help available. I am not saying everything is start, but I want you to learn how I apply all the buttons inside the div, that CSS, this 16 pixel CSS to be applied to all the buttons wherever I create one more button, I don't have to define that CSS. Automatically it is applied. So how I do that? I want you to learn and then do that. Okay. So I'm ending this session with that. Any questions is there? Please let me know. Any questions? Please let me know before I close today's session. Okay, then there is no questions. So we stop at this point. Have a happy weekend. Monday we'll come back. Saturday there will be MCQ. There will be MCQ on all the things that we have taken from beginning to the end as on date. It is not that only for last week subject. It will be for all the things that we have taken from beginning till now. Right? So that is how it will be. So MCQ is there tomorrow. I hope if it is not there, they will inform again. I hope it is there. Every week there is an MCQ. Thank you. I stop my share. Rajesh, you can stop the recording.